Mario and Luigi Partners in Time is a game that I deeply care about despite it being called the black sheep of the series. I still play it even to this day to revisit my childhood, and recently I had the idea of doing some research on its beta elements and unused content and talk about it, which quite a lot of people wanted me to make a video about, so I said sure, why not. We'll be covering multiple stuff from early versions of the game, unused areas and early screenshots, regional differences, and other interesting things as well that you'll see in the video. Also, note that I've done all of the research and editing by myself. I tried to cover everything I found, but if I miss anything in the video, then please tell me in the comments and please forgive me. So bearing all that in mind, let's start talking about the beta elements and unused content of Mario and Luigi Partners in Time. Partners in Time's development began shortly after Superstar Saga, which was around 2004. In E3 2005, Nintendo was revealing a lot of games that they cooked for their new system, the DS. Shit like New Super Mario Bros. DS, Mario Kart DS, Animal Crossing, Nintendogs, and holy guacamole, a new Mario and Luigi game. At that time, it had a different logo and it was called Mario and Luigi 2 instead of Partners in Time, and it's similar to the Japanese title of the game. In the E3 trailer, there was plenty of interesting things different from the final version of the game. There's hearts in place of the low resolution heads of the bros next to the HP number, and the numbers have a different font which looks way better than the bland and normal looking font used in the final game in my opinion. It also appears that the L button was going to be used to toss the babies and switch between the two sets of bros instead of using the A, B, X and Y buttons. There's also this star counter thing when Mario and Luigi are in Toadwood Forest, which I'll get into later. After that, we are shown two unused things in the game, an unused enemy and an unused bros attack, which their files are thankfully still left in the game. Let's talk about the enemy first. His name is Scooch Bloop, which is a very damn adorable name, and he is the only unused enemy we know about. Based on the trailer, it seems like he was going to be in the Vim factory, but for some reason his stats are similar to the enemies found in Yoshi's Island and Yube's Brilliant files. And interestingly enough, he is fully functional when you try to spawn him in battle. Kinda. He has only one attack, and it consists of him ramming into one of the bros just like a Goomba, but when it's the other Bloop's turn to attack, he just stands in front of the bros looking at them with his soulless eyes, which straight up softlooks the game. The reason that happens is because after the first Bloop's turn finishes, he goes to the top left of the screen and remains there for some reason, and the other Bloop waits for the first Bloop to return to his original location so that he can attack, but he never does that, so they stay like that forever. Moving on to the unused bros attack, its name is the Spike Shell. It's basically the green shell attack, but you hit it with a hammer instead of kicking it. And it's very similar to an attack Bowser Jr. uses, where he hits Bowser with a hammer. Sadly, although it's still in the files, using it would crash the game, so you can't really use it. The last thing from the trailer we're gonna talk about is the trampoline bros attack. In Partners in Time, each bro jumps on the trampoline and stomp on a random enemy in a random order, and it goes on forever until you mess up the attack. However, the way it works in the trailer is very different and it doesn't make sense at all. Every bro jumps on the trampoline to execute the attack, but for some reason when the bros were falling, they didn't land on the enemy in the bottom screen and Mario and baby Luigi fell twice. I replayed this trampoline part of the trailer multiple times and in slow motion, and it kinda seemed like this segment was edited, so it probably functioned like normal in that build of the game just like in the final version. Also, one very unnoticeable detail I found is that whenever the bros manage to get a great in their attack, the sound for it is almost the exact same one used for Bowser's Inside Story. That means the unused sound effect was later used for the third game, which is kinda cool. There was also a press kit in 2005, and it contained some artwork of the game that had baby Mario with red shoes instead of blue, which was just a coloring mistake, as well as a total of 15 pre-release screenshots, so let's take a look at them. There are screenshots of an early Japanese build of Partners in Time that is earlier than the one shown in E3. I was quite excited to see what the screenshots had in store and thought that they would have a lot of things to talk about, but they are really similar to the final version of Partners in Time and contain things we've already seen like the Scooch Bloop and the Spike Shell. However, there are 4 screenshots that contain things we haven't seen yet. Let's start with this one. It shows the bros fighting Boo guys in Holy Jolly Village using the Mix Flower. Boo guys are supposed to be in Toadwood Forest and not in Holy Jolly Village. In fact, Holy Jolly Village has 0 enemies to fight with. not a single fly is in there. They probably removed them from there in the final version of the game to make Holy Jolly Village feel more lonely and depressing, which kinda makes sense. The big fireball that appears while using the mixed flower looks different from the final game as well, and all of the bros seem to be shooting fireballs at it all at once, which is very different from how the attack is supposed to function, because in the game, each bro takes a turn to shoot at it. Thank God it doesn't work like that, because spamming all the 4 buttons as fast as you can would have been a nightmare. Moving on to the other 3 screenshots, they all have one single interesting thing in common, and it's the minimap of Joywood Forest. The maps in this early build of the game are the exact same ones in the final version, with the only difference being that they don't show the save album or the time hole. In this part of Yoshi's Island having bushes instead of trees. But the style of Joywood Forest map in these screenshots is extremely different from the other maps, and it's very noticeable. It also has a different looking time hole with a different tone and coloring and a slightly different design. At that point of development, Alpha Dream was probably almost finished with the mini-maps of the areas except for Joywood Forest and maybe some other ones. Now let's talk about the kiosk demos of the game. We have playable ROMs of a US store and an EU store kiosk demos, but they are very late pre-final builds of Partners in Time, meaning that the game was pretty much finished at that point. So they are mostly the exact same as the final build of the game, and they don't have anything necessarily interesting to talk about. But we also have one recording of someone playing the E3 kiosk demo, which is similar to the 2 demos I mentioned, but does have some elements from the early builds. So I'll be focusing on the E3 kiosk demo instead of the other 2. The kiosk demos provided 2 playable areas of the game that you can choose, Joywood Forest and the Vim Factory, but in the E3 kiosk demo you can actually play Yoshi's Island as well, and in each one of those levels you are given a certain task to complete. Now remember the star counter thing I mentioned earlier in the video? There's also this star counter thing when Mario and Luigi are in Joywood Forest, which I'll get into later. Well, that thing is supposed to be the mission given in Joywood Forest. In the kiosk demos, the game tells you to collect hidden stars. The first battle shown in the footage is where we get to see new things. First is this enemy is named Neander Koopa instead of Coopelian, which is a really weird name if you ask me. The red shell also seems to have worked slightly different in here. It appears to be a bit slower than in the final game, and the babies aren't able to ride on it to deal extra damage when all of the 4 bros are together. And when the enemy dies before the attack ends, you can actually get the shell back. And also, the end battle transition is different from the final version, and this actually looks way cooler. Why the hell did they remove some awesome stuff from the game? I don't get it, I just don't get it. Also, the trampoline attack appears to function normally just like in the final version in this demo, which means that there's a 99.9999999999999 chance that the segment in the E3 trailer was definitely edited, just like I said before. The footage doesn't feature the Vim Factory since the person recording immediately goes to Yoshi's Island after Joywood Forest, but if you're curious, in the demos we have access to, the goal in the Vim Factory is simply defeating the Swiggler. When entering Yoshi's Island, we can see that its original name was going to be actually Yo-Star Island. I personally think that this sounds better than just calling it Yoshi's Island. They definitely changed the name to directly reference the Yoshi games, which makes sense. Now the goal in here is to find the golden egg. It doesn't appear in the footage, but we do have its sprite, as well as a sprite for a pile of logs that was used as a stand for the egg to lay on. In one of the battles in the footage, it appears like you would have been able to try out the spike shell, but the guy who recorded the video didn't try it out. One interesting little detail about it is that it's called a hammer attack, meaning the adult bros can't use it and only the babies can, which leads to a theory that there might have been other concepts for other hammer attacks that we don't know of. Honestly, if these hammer bros attacks were implemented, it would have made bros attacks have more death with the babies gimmick. It's very disappointing that Alpha Dream just gave us 2 shell attacks that barely have any difference. Like, come on dude, why didn't you give us the spike shell? We've been talking a lot about G3 stuff, so let's finally take a look at the unused things left in the game. Let's start with the sprites. There's an early sprite for the mushroom that resembles the mushrooms from Superstar Saga, an early sprite for the mixed flower which uses similar colors to the copy flower, a big chunky and golden version of the refresh room used to heal Toadsworth in the game, and finally a fully animated walking womp NPC that was most likely going to be in Thwomp Volcano. Next is the music. There's only one theme in the files that was unused, and it's an early version of the ending sequence of Partners in Time. which kinda sounds more like the Superstar Saga version. There's also unused stats for enemies. Based on their stats, Bob-Bombs seem like they would have been in Bowser's Castle instead of Gritzy Desert, and Love Bubbles, the most annoying enemy in this game, were going to be in Gritzy Caves instead of Toad Town. There's also an unused version of Kamek that has lower stats than the Swiggler and the Elite Hammer Bros, which are the first bosses of the game. So it was probably planned to be a boss in Bowser's Castle in the jumping tutorial section instead of Yoshi's Island. The game already has 2 jumping tutorial bosses and they wanted to make a third one. Wow, I'm flabbergasted. Baby Bowser has a few questionable unused variations. Baby Bowser U.V.1 has all the stats set to 1, U.V.2 Baby Bowser has the flying status for some reason, and the game also literally crashes after his text box appears. And U.V.3 Baby Bowser has an attack that just skips a turn. That's it. And lastly, there's a super overpowered version of Lucky Chufo and Spiny Shrupa that are literally way stronger than the enemies from the final area of the game. So the game originally might have had a higher difficulty curve, which is quite surprising considering the game is already really damn hard. There's also a debug menu, by the way, that allows you to warp to some areas and cutscenes in the game, as well as some of the unused rooms that I'll get into in a bit. Also, the options at the debug menu are titled with names of the developers or partners in time. Kubota, who's the game design director and scenario lead, Kobayashi, Fujioka, and Goto, who were the field designers, and Maekawa, who's the production manager. Alright, now's the time for the unused rooms. Surprisingly, there's quite a lot to talk about in here, and I found them to be the most interesting while researching for this video. First of all, we have 2 versions of the Gritzy Caves minimap. Probably. The reason why I said they're probably early versions of Gritzy Caves is because we're not really sure about that, since the only argument that backs up this theory is that it looks like an underground desert. For some reason, these 2 minimaps are rooms in the files. They're Room OX03 and Room OX04. In Room OX03, the map looks quite complex with many rooms and routes. It has boulders blocking some paths, a block, 2 torches and a green pipe in a certain room, another green pipe in another room, and piranha plants almost everywhere. It seems like the piranha plants would have been a way to go from a room to another, kind of like a pipe. They would probably swallow the bros and spit them in another room. As for the boulders, you maybe had to do something to break them. And as for the torches, I really don't know. OX04 looks really different from the previous one, but the layout and elements are almost identical. One of the torches is replaced by a campfire, and the other one is replaced by this odd sprite which nobody knows what it's supposed to even be. According to the cut-in room floor, it may have been an early puzzle of some sorts. The next room we're gonna talk about is Room OX00, which is actually related to Superstar Saga. It looks like it's based on the western side of B&B in Castletown that seems to have been used for debug purposes only. It has a flaming hooligan statue and some barrels that can't be interacted with, as well as a Toad NPC taken from Superstar Saga. Also, oddly enough, Toadsworth spawns near the player in the room, and he looks like he's being sent to heaven. Are you okay, Toadsworth? Personally, I think it was going to be a small area in the final game where an immigrant B&B community lives in the Mushroom Kingdom, kind of like the Toads in Little Fungi Town from Superstar Saga. The rest of the rooms are just test rooms for things like walking, collision, and bros moves. However, there's one room that contains something kind of interesting. It contains Yoshi eggs that never appear in the final game, and if you touch them, they break your eardrums with the hammer sound effect. Nice! We're not done yet with the unused content related to areas, because we have early graphics of some locations, 2 to be exact, and they're early versions of Yoshi's Island, the Toadwood Forest. I don't really have anything to say about the Yoshi's Island one other than that it looks way different in terms of the art style, and it looks really charming and it gives off Superstar Saga vibes. However, the Toadwood Forest one is... holy fuck, I might shit my pants. Literally nothing can describe this area other than that it's pure nightmare fuel. I mean, look at the creepy and soulless faces of the toads trapped into the trees having their energy sucked out of them. Some of them even have their bodies reduced to just skin. The trees are also slightly more creepier than in the final version. I found it kinda odd that barely anyone talked about this early version of this area for Partners in Time, considering how terrifying it is, and I'm still surprised that this game is rated E for everyone. Alpha Dream was definitely going for a way darker and serious tone for Partners in Time, but wasn't able to because Nintendo reminded them and said, "Hey, you're working on a Mario game." Oh, right. To move on from this monstrosity, look at this. You most likely don't know what this is, yet might be thinking, well, this doesn't look like anything for Partners in Time. Which you are right, because these sprites are from ice climbers that were found in Partners in Time for some reason. It's found in a folder called Oshida Test, alongside some random things like Yoshi's Island Battle background and a black and white picture of the early logo. Interestingly enough, Ushida is the name of the menu programmer of Partners in Time, which is Masafumi Ushida. There's this really cool interactive website of Partners in Time where you learn about the game inside the time machine, and it is something small but it's still really cool. Originally, the game wasn't going to have those boring tutorials we see in every Mario and Luigi game. Players would have learned the basics of the game just by playing it and learning on their own, but Nintendo told Kubota to include some tutorial-like elements. Thanks, Nintendo. Also, Kubota said that the idea for time traveling originally started with the concept of using all of the DS's 4 buttons, so they thought of including the babies and came up with the plot of time traveling so that it would make sense as to how and why the babies are with the normal Mario and Luigi. There was a scene that featured Luigi being hit on the head by a washtub falling from the ceiling at Partners in Time, which is a common gag in Japanese slapstick, a traditional form of Japanese comedy, but Nintendo's North American localization changed it to a bucket in the final game. Interestingly enough, there's nothing regarding the scene where Luigi gets hit by a bucket, which is kinda strange. And finally, we got the regional differences. There's a lot of regional differences at Partners in Time regarding many things, especially battles and enemies. In the Sunnyside fight, the second Yoshi that hatches from one of the eggs is black in the North American version, but was changed to yellow in the European and Japanese version. Elder Princess Shrew and Bowser heal 40 HP less in those two versions. In Elder Shrew Boyd's second phase, he summons a UFO with a countdown that instantly kills you when it reaches 0. In the North American version, the UFO moves between sides, and the babies must hammer spiked balls that are thrown by the Elder Shrew Boy to reset the timer. Baby Mario hits the ball up and right, and Baby Luigi hits it straight up. And it was kinda confusing for players since the game never tells you about this. So, in the Japanese and European versions, the UFO stays in one spot and both babies can hit it, which is a lot easier. The stats were also changed for most of the enemies in the game. Their HP got decreased in the European and Japanese version, while their power and defense got increased. And the Swiggler, Bowser, Elder Shrew Boyd, and Elder Princess Shrew have automatic attacks, meaning whenever you attack them, they will always attack back no matter whose turn it is. The save album in Toad Town was moved to the inside of the shop for some reason for those new versions, and I don't know why they made such a useless change. Some gear were given more defense boosts and the prices for 1-ups are a bit cheaper. And the final regional change is the credits. After the staff roll, the game shows you a group picture with no music in the background, but in the European and Japanese version, a slow music box plays in the background. God, it fucking brought tears to my eyes. It's just so beautiful to be honest, and it was a really good addition to the point later North American versions added it, and it became a trend for each entry to have a music box in the end. Seeing the picture with this blue background and moving clouds after going through all of what's happened in the game truly gives off a really weird yet peaceful feeling that can't really be described, and I just really love it. Anyways, that's it. I really had fun making this video despite it taking me a lot of time. I was a bit sad to not find any concept art for the game like Superstar Saga, and I really wanted to see early ideas and concepts for things like the Shroobs and Bros moves, but the things that were found thanks to the fandom were still really interesting and it was really cool to see how the game looked like, which made me love Partners in Time even more. Oh, and by the way, there's some unused text in the game that says, "This is a test message. My dog has fleas. Your scalp is dry." What the fuck?